Welcome back to the Sleepy Stoic Sanctuary, where ancient wisdom becomes the foundation for modern strength. Tonight, we enter the private study of Marcus Aurelius, not just the most powerful man of his age, but the philosopher who proved that true strength comes not from commanding armies, but from commanding yourself. Here was an emperor who ruled the known world while mastering the only territory that truly matters, the landscape of his own mind. This is not merely the story of a great ruler. This is the blueprint for building what Marcus called the Inner Citadel, that impregnable fortress of the disciplined mind, where external chaos cannot penetrate, where rational thought reigns supreme, where you become truly free, regardless of what circumstances surround you. Marcus Aurelius faced challenges that would break lesser men: plague ravaging his empire, barbarian invasions threatening Rome's borders, political betrayals from those he trusted, the constant burden of decisions that affected millions of lives. Yet through it all, he maintained the philosophical discipline that made him not just a great emperor, but a model of masculine strength through wisdom. Tonight, you will learn the secrets he wrote in his private journal, thoughts never intended for publication, but meant only to strengthen his own character in the face of overwhelming responsibility. These are the meditations of a man who understood that the only victory that truly matters is the victory over your own weaknesses, your own fears, your own undisciplined thoughts. As you settle into your bed, prepare to build your own inner citadel, that place of calm strength where you can retreat when the world becomes chaotic, where your true character can develop undisturbed by external pressures, where you can find the peace that comes from aligning your actions with your deepest values. Be calm, be clear, be dangerous. Tonight, we learn to rule ourselves with the wisdom of the greatest philosopher-emperor who ever lived. Take 3 deep breaths with me now. In through your nose, hold for a moment, and release slowly through your mouth. Feel your body beginning to settle into the comfort of your bed. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Release any tension you've been carrying from the day. Your jaw relaxes, your forehead smooths, and your eyes grow heavy with the approach of peaceful sleep. Starting from the crown of your head, imagine a warm, golden light beginning to flow down through your body. This is the light of ancient philosophical wisdom, the same light that guided Marcus Aurelius through his darkest trials. Feel it flowing down your forehead, relaxing every muscle in your face. The golden light moves down your neck and shoulders, releasing all tension. Your arms grow heavy and relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress. Your chest rises and falls, in a natural, peaceful rhythm. Each breath brings you deeper into the tranquility of philosophical minds at rest. Feel the warm light flowing down through your torso, relaxing your back, your abdomen, releasing any stress or worry you may have been holding. You are safe here. In this moment, you are protected by the wisdom of ages. The light continues down through your hips and thighs, warming every muscle, encouraging complete relaxation. Your legs grow heavy, sinking into the bed as if they're resting after a long day of ruling wisely. Down through your calves and feet, the golden light completes its journey, leaving you completely relaxed, completely at peace, completely ready to receive the timeless wisdom of philosophical strength and inner sovereignty. Your mind grows quiet and receptive. Like Marcus Aurelius in his private study, looking out over the eternal city while contemplating the eternal principles that govern a life well lived. You are ready for whatever wisdom this ancient philosophical teaching will bring to your dreams. You are grounded in this moment, yet open to the profound insights that await in the realm of philosophical wisdom. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready to learn from the meditations of the greatest emperor philosopher, knowing that his strength will become your strength. Breathe deeply and let the most profound philosophical wisdom ever written begin. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire at its height, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Euphrates. Every morning, he woke knowing that his decisions would affect the lives of 50 million people. Wars to be fought, laws to be made, justice to be administered, an empire to be held together through the sheer force of his character and judgment. Yet this most powerful of men understood a truth that escapes most people even today, that all external power is meaningless if you cannot govern yourself, that ruling others is impossible if you have not first learned to rule your own thoughts, emotions, and desires. In the quiet hours before dawn, while his empire slept, Marcus would write in his personal journal, not state documents or imperial decrees, but reminders to himself about how to live with virtue, how to maintain perspective in the face of overwhelming responsibility, how to find strength in philosophical principles when political pressures threaten to compromise his character. These writings, which we now call meditations, were never meant for publication. They were the private exercises of a man who understood that leadership is not about commanding others, but about continuously commanding yourself to be worthy of the trust others place in you. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote to himself, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Here was an emperor who could have surrounded himself with flatterers, then gazing on the desk, who could have lived in luxury while others suffered, who could have used his power for personal gain. Instead, he chose the harder path, the path of philosophical discipline, moral responsibility, and continuous self-improvement. Marcus understood that true strength comes not from what you can force others to do, but from what you can discipline yourself to become. Not from the power you wield over circumstances, but from the sovereignty you establish over your own responses to those circumstances. This was a man who faced plague, war, betrayal, and the daily burden of decisions that could save or destroy lives, yet never lost sight of the philosophical principles that made such burdens bearable and such power worthy of respect. The most famous passage from Marcus's private writings contains what may be the most important insight ever recorded about human strength. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Think about the revolutionary nature of this idea. Here was a man who commanded legions, who could order the construction of cities or the destruction of enemies, who held what appeared to be unlimited external power. But instead of allowing these external circumstances to control his internal state, Marcus developed what he called the Inner Citadel, a fortress of rational thought that no external force can penetrate. This was not denial of reality or wishful thinking, but the practical discipline of separating what was within his control from what was not. Confine yourself to the present, he reminded himself when overwhelmed by the magnitude of his responsibilities. Not because the future didn't matter, but because anxiety about future events that might never occur was a waste of mental energy that could be better spent on present actions. When facing criticism or betrayal, he would write, "How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This was not selfishness, but the wisdom of understanding that you cannot control others' actions, only your own responses. The Inner Citadel was not a place of retreat from responsibility, but a source of strength for meeting responsibility more effectively. By disciplining his mind to focus only on what he could actually control, Marcus freed himself from the emotional chaos that renders most people ineffective in crisis. This is the foundation of masculine strength, not the ability to dominate others through force or manipulation, but the ability to maintain rational thought and virtuous action regardless of external pressures. Not the power to control circumstances, but the power to choose how you'll respond to whatever circumstances arise. Modern men face different challenges than Roman emperors, but the principles remain the same. In a world of information overload, social media chaos, political division, and economic uncertainty, the ability to maintain control over your own thoughts and responses is more valuable than any external achievement. The Inner Citadel is not built in a day, but through daily practice of philosophical discipline, the habit of examining your thoughts, questioning your emotional reactions, and choosing your responses based on reason rather than impulse. Marcus Aurelius ruled during a time of constant change, empires rising and falling, technologies advancing, social structures evolving, individuals being born and dying in endless cycles. Rather than fighting against this reality, he found in it a source of philosophical strength and practical wisdom. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it, he wrote, capturing in a single sentence what many people spend lifetimes trying to understand. Change is not an interruption of the natural order, it is the natural order. Fighting against change is like fighting against gravity or the movement of the stars. But Marcus went deeper than simply accepting change as inevitable. He understood that change could be a source of liberation for those wise enough to embrace it. If everything is temporary, then both suffering and success are temporary. If all circumstances are impermanent, then no external situation can permanently define who you are. This insight freed him from both the despair that comes from bad times and the anxiety that comes from good times. When the plague ravaged his empire, he reminded himself that this too would pass, and that his job was not to prevent all suffering, but to respond to present challenges with virtue and wisdom. When military victories brought temporary glory, he reminded himself that this too would pass, and that his worth as a man was not measured by external achievements, but by the character he displayed while achieving them. Remember that very little disturbs the balance of a mind accustomed to live according to nature and to the eternal laws, he wrote during one of his military campaigns. The eternal laws were not the political laws of the empire, but the philosophical principles that remain constant even as everything else changes. For modern men, this wisdom is equally relevant. In careers that can be transformed overnight by technology, in relationships that require constant adaptation, in financial markets that rise and fall unpredictably, the ability to find stability in philosophical principles rather than external circumstances is not just comforting, it is essential for effectiveness. Marcus taught that strength comes not from resisting change, but from developing the character that can thrive regardless of what changes occur, not from trying to control outcomes, but from focusing completely on the quality of effort you bring to whatever situation you face. This is why he could face the death of loved ones, military defeats, political betrayals, and personal illness with equanimity. Not because these things didn't matter, but because he had built his identity on principles that transcended any particular outcome. When you understand that change is the fundamental nature of reality, you stop wasting energy trying to make temporary things permanent and start investing that energy in developing the character that can flourish under any conditions. In a world where power often corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, Marcus Aurelius demonstrated something extraordinary, that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the character to transform yourself into someone who doesn't need to. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, he wrote, and he lived this principle even when it would have been easier and perhaps more satisfying to choose vindication over virtue. Marcus faced betrayals that would justify almost any response. His most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, led a rebellion against him, declaring himself emperor and attempting to seize control of the eastern provinces. When Cassius was killed by his own men before Marcus could reach him, the emperor had every legal and political justification to execute Cassius's family and supporters. Instead, Marcus chose mercy. He burned Cassius's letters unread, saying he did not want to know who else might have supported the rebellion. He protected the conspirators' family and allowed them to keep their property. When asked why he showed such leniency to those who had betrayed him, Marcus replied that the quality of his response would determine the quality of his character, regardless of what they had done. This was not weakness disguised as mercy. This was strength so complete that it didn't need external validation. Marcus understood that allowing others' poor choices to determine your own responses was actually a form of slavery, a surrender of your moral autonomy to their bad example. Whenever you want to cheer yourself up, consider the good qualities of your companions, he reminded himself, choosing to focus on the virtues of those around him rather than dwelling on their failures. This was not naive optimism, but strategic thinking about where to invest mental energy for maximum personal and practical benefit. The principle extends beyond betrayal to every form of conflict and disagreement. In our modern world of social media outrage, political division, and personal disputes, the temptation to respond to poor behavior with poor behavior of our own is constant. Marcus's example shows a different path, the path of maintaining your own standards regardless of what standards others choose. This doesn't mean being passive in the face of injustice or failing to protect yourself and others from harmful behavior. Marcus was still an emperor who had to make difficult decisions about law and order. But it means choosing your responses based on your own principles rather than on others' provocations. You can commit injustice by doing nothing, he wrote, understanding that virtue sometimes requires action, but he also understood that the character you display while taking necessary action is often more important than the action itself. The man who chooses virtue over vindication, who responds to poor behavior with good character, who maintains his own standards regardless of what standards others choose, demonstrates a form of strength that cannot be defeated by any external force. This is the strength that builds lasting respect, that creates positive influence, that allows you to sleep peacefully regardless of what conflicts surround you. When someone treats you poorly, they are revealing their character. How you respond reveals yours. Marcus chose to make his responses a source of pride rather than regret, of strength rather than weakness, of virtue rather than vindication. Among all of Marcus's insights, perhaps none is more relevant to modern life than his understanding of the power that comes from focusing completely on the present moment. Confine yourself to the present, he wrote, not as an escape from responsibility, but as the foundation for meeting responsibility more effectively. Marcus faced the same temporal anxieties that plague people today. Regrets about past decisions, worries about future outcomes, the feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer scope of long-term challenges. As emperor, he could have spent all his time agonizing over historical mistakes or obsessing about future threats to the empire. Instead, he developed the discipline of presence, the ability to bring his full attention to whatever task or decision was immediately before him. Not because the past and future didn't matter, but because the present moment was the only place where he could actually exercise any influence. "It never ceases to amaze me," he wrote. "We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." This was his recognition that most mental suffering comes not from present circumstances, but from our thoughts about those circumstances. Thoughts that are often based on imagined futures or interpreted pasts rather than actual present realities. When leading military campaigns against barbarian tribes, Marcus could have been paralyzed by thoughts of all the previous emperors who had failed in similar situations, or by fears about what defeat might mean for Rome's future. Instead, he focused his attention completely on present conditions. What intelligence was available? What resources were at hand? What decisions needed to be made based on current rather than hypothetical circumstances? This present-focused approach didn't make him reactive or short-sighted. Rather, it allowed him to make better long-term decisions because they were based on accurate assessment of actual conditions, rather than anxious projections about possible outcomes. You can rid yourself of many useless things among those that disturb you, for they lie entirely in your imagination, he observed. The discipline of distinguishing between real present challenges and imaginary future problems was fundamental to his effectiveness as both emperor and philosopher. For modern men, this wisdom is particularly relevant in an age of information overload and constant connectivity. The ability to focus completely on present tasks while resisting the pull of digital distractions, future anxieties, and past regrets has become a rare and valuable skill. Marcus showed that presence is not about ignoring the future or forgetting the past, but about recognizing that your power to influence both past and future exists only in the present moment. Past mistakes can only be corrected through present actions. Future goals can only be achieved through present decisions. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love, he wrote, demonstrating how presence leads naturally to gratitude rather than anxiety. The emperor who could focus completely on the present conversation, the present decision, the present challenge, was more effective than emperors who dissipated their attention across multiple time periods and hypothetical scenarios. This is why he could maintain clarity and decisiveness under pressure, why he could find peace even during times of war and crisis, why he could lead effectively while maintaining philosophical perspective. Presence was not a luxury he indulged when he had time. It was the foundation that made all his other accomplishments possible. Perhaps the most motivating passage in all of Marcus's writings is also one of the most direct. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Here was an emperor who understood that philosophy without action is merely intellectual entertainment, that wisdom without application is ultimately worthless. Marcus lived in a world full of philosophical debate and intellectual discourse. The Roman elite were well educated in Stoic principles, could quote the great philosophers, and could engage in sophisticated discussions about virtue and character. But Marcus recognized that knowledge without implementation was not just useless. It was a form of moral cowardice. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, "I have to go to work as a human being." This was his recognition that philosophy is not about thinking great thoughts, but about living a great life. That virtue is not about understanding goodness in theory, but about choosing goodness in practice, especially when it's difficult. Throughout his reign, Marcus faced countless opportunities to compromise his principles for political advantage, to choose expedience over virtue, to take the easier path rather than the right path. Each time, he chose action aligned with his philosophical convictions rather than action aligned with immediate convenience. When the plague devastated the empire, he could have retreated to safety and let others deal with the crisis. Instead, he remained in Rome, organizing relief efforts and maintaining government functions while personally attending to the needs of his people. Philosophy, for Marcus, meant taking responsibility rather than seeking comfort. When military campaigns required him to spend years away from the luxuries of the capital, living in frontier camps and facing the hardships of war, he could have delegated these responsibilities to others. Instead, he understood that leadership meant sharing the burdens you ask others to bear, that virtue means doing your duty regardless of personal cost. In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present: I am rising to the work of a human being. Why then am I dissatisfied if I am going to do the things for which I exist and for which I was brought into this world? This was his daily reminder that virtue is not about feelings, but about actions. The call to action in Stoic philosophy is not frantic activity or busy work, but purposeful engagement with whatever responsibilities life has placed before you. It's about becoming the kind of person who does the right thing even when no one is watching, who keeps commitments even when it's inconvenient, who stands up for principles even when it's costly. Marcus understood that every day offers opportunities to practice virtue or to compromise it, to build character or to erode it, to live according to philosophical principles or to abandon them for temporary advantage. But choice is made not in grand dramatic moments, but in small daily decisions about how to respond to ordinary challenges. You could die today. Let this determine your actions and thoughts, he wrote, not to create morbid anxiety, but to inspire immediate commitment to virtue. Life is short, time is limited, and the opportunity to build character through action is available only in the present moment. This is the call that echoes across 2,000 years. Stop debating what virtue looks like and start embodying it. Stop planning to be a good man someday and start being one today. Stop making excuses for compromise and start making choices that align with your deepest values. The emperor, who could have justified almost any behavior through political necessity, chose instead to justify his behavior through philosophical principle. This is the challenge he presents to every man: not to find excuses for mediocrity, but to find ways to excellence, one decision at a time. One of Marcus's most profound insights was his understanding of what he called the discipline of desire, the practice of wanting what happens rather than demanding that what you want should happen. This was not passive resignation, but active alignment with reality as the foundation for effective action. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you, he wrote, recognizing that much of human suffering comes not from external circumstances themselves, but from our resistance to those circumstances. As emperor, Marcus could have spent his reign fighting against the limitations of his position, the constant demands on his time, the political compromises required to maintain stability, the endless parade of problems that required his attention. Instead, he chose to find meaning and purpose within those limitations. When plague struck the empire, he didn't waste energy raging against the unfairness of disease or demanding that reality conform to his preferences for a healthy population. Instead, he accepted the plague as a fact to be dealt with and focused his energy on responding to it as effectively and compassionately as possible. This discipline extended to personal losses as well. Marcus lost several children to disease and accident, experienced the deaths of close friends and advisors, and faced the constant possibility of his own death through illness or assassination. Rather than allowing grief and fear to paralyze him, he practiced what he called loving acceptance of the natural order. Death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back, he wrote, capturing the essence of how philosophical discipline transforms our relationship with circumstances beyond our control. But the discipline of desire is not limited to accepting tragedy. It also applies to accepting success, pleasure, and good fortune without becoming attached to them as permanent fixtures of life. Marcus enjoyed the privileges of imperial position while understanding that they were temporary responsibilities rather than personal possessions. This practice created a form of inner freedom that no external circumstances could touch. When things went well, he was grateful but not dependent. When things went poorly, he was disappointed but not devastated. His emotional equilibrium was based on philosophical principles rather than external outcomes. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking, he observed. The discipline of desire meant finding contentment in virtue rather than circumstances, in character development rather than external achievement. For modern men, this wisdom offers a path out of the endless cycle of wanting more, achieving more, then wanting even more. The discipline of desire doesn't mean abandoning ambition, but it does mean finding satisfaction in the process of pursuing worthy goals rather than only in achieving them. It means appreciating what you have while working for what you want. It means accepting setbacks as part of the journey rather than as evidence that the journey isn't worth taking. It means finding peace in effort rather than demanding peace from outcomes. Marcus showed that this discipline is not about lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. He maintained the highest standards for himself and his empire, while accepting that those standards would be met through process rather than by demanding immediate perfection. The man who can want what happens has discovered the secret of contentment without complacency, acceptance without passivity, peace without surrender. This is the foundation of inner strength that allows you to engage fully with life while remaining fundamentally unshakable, regardless of what life brings. One of Marcus's most powerful philosophical practices was what he called the view from above, the mental exercise of imagining himself and his circumstances from the perspective of cosmic space and time. This practice transformed both his understanding of problems and his approach to solutions. How small a fragment of time is allotted to each of us, he wrote, for very swiftly it vanishes in the universal stream. This was not meant to diminish the importance of human life, but to put daily struggles and anxieties into proper perspective. When facing political crises that seem to threaten the very foundations of the empire, Marcus would imagine viewing these events from far above the earth, seeing the Roman territories as a small part of a vast world, and the current crisis as a brief moment in the long history of human civilization. This cosmic perspective didn't make him careless about his responsibilities. If anything, it helped him respond more effectively by eliminating the emotional distortions that come from seeing temporary problems as permanent catastrophes. Think of yourself as dead, he advised himself during particularly stressful periods. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. This practice of imagining his life from the perspective of its end helped him focus on what truly mattered rather than getting caught up in temporary concerns. The view from above also helped Marcus maintain humility about his achievements and position. From a cosmic perspective, the difference between emperor and slave, between fame and obscurity, between wealth and poverty, shrinks to insignificance compared to the difference between virtue and vice, between living according to philosophical principles and living according to impulse. Remember how brief life is, how vast the universe, he wrote. What is the longest lived among us compared to eternity? What the strongest among us compared to the cosmic forces? Yet philosophical virtue can make any man equal to the gods in terms of living according to nature. This perspective practice served multiple practical purposes. It reduced anxiety about problems that would resolve themselves with time. It increased focus on actions and decisions that would matter in the long term. It provided comfort during difficult periods by reminding him that all suffering is temporary when viewed from the perspective of cosmic time. But perhaps most importantly, the view from above connected Marcus to something larger than his individual life and concerns. It reminded him that he was part of a universal order that had existed long before his birth and would continue long after his death, and that his highest purpose was to play his part in that order with virtue and wisdom. For modern men facing the daily pressures of career, relationships, financial responsibilities, and personal challenges, the view from above offers similar benefits. It helps distinguish between problems that deserve serious attention and problems that will resolve themselves with time and perspective. It reminds us that our individual lives, while precious and important, are part of something much larger than our personal desires and fears. It provides access to a peace and strength that comes from connection to eternal principles rather than temporary circumstances. Marcus showed that this cosmic perspective is not an escape from responsibility, but a foundation for meeting responsibility with proper proportion, lasting strength, and philosophical wisdom that can guide action regardless of what challenges arise. The emperor who could see his empire from the perspective of the stars was better able to govern it wisely than emperors who saw only the immediate political pressures surrounding them. Every morning, before the demands of empire claimed his attention, Marcus Aurelius would spend time in private reflection and writing. These morning practices were not merely intellectual exercises, but practical preparation for meeting the day's challenges with philosophical strength and clarity. Begin each day by telling yourself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness," he wrote in one of his most famous passages. This was not pessimism, but practical preparation. By anticipating difficulties, he could respond to them with virtue rather than surprise. The morning reflection served multiple purposes. They reminded him of his philosophical principles before those principles were tested by real-world pressures. They helped him set intentions for the kind of person he wanted to be that day, regardless of what circumstances he might face. "They act like this because they don't know any better," he would remind himself about difficult people he might encounter. "But you have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to your own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine." This daily practice of philosophical preparation was like mental armor, protection against the emotional reactions that could compromise his judgment and effectiveness. By starting each day with reminders about virtue, mortality, and proper perspective, he was less likely to be thrown off balance by unexpected challenges. The emperor, who could have started each day with briefings about military threats, economic problems, and political intrigues, instead chose to start each day with reminders about character, duty, and philosophical wisdom. This priority reflected his understanding that external challenges are best met from a foundation of internal strength. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, "I have to go to work. As a human being, what do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do?" This was his way of transforming the common experience of morning reluctance into an opportunity for philosophical motivation. Marcus understood that consistency in small daily practices creates strength for handling large occasional crises. The habits of morning reflection, evening review, and moment-to-moment awareness of philosophical principles were the foundation that made his legendary equanimity possible. Keep constantly in mind the doctors who died after frowning over their patients, the astrologers who made such a to-do about predicting the deaths of others, the philosophers who expatiated endlessly on death or immortality. He wrote, reminding himself that life is short and that philosophical principles are meant to be lived, not just discussed. These morning practices were intensely practical. They helped him approach meetings with difficult people from a position of philosophical strength rather than emotional reactivity. They reminded him of his larger purposes when daily frustrations tempted him toward pettiness or anger. For modern men, Marcus's example demonstrates the power of beginning each day with intentional reflection on character and purpose. Whether through meditation, journaling, reading, or simple contemplation, the practice of philosophical preparation can transform how you experience and respond to whatever challenges the day brings. The man who spends time each morning connecting with his deepest values and highest aspirations is better equipped to live according to those values when pressure mounts and convenience tempts compromise. Marcus showed that leadership begins with self-leadership, that governing others effectively requires first governing yourself, and that the strength to meet external challenges comes from the daily discipline of building internal character. His morning reflections were not a luxury he enjoyed when he had time, but a necessity that made his effectiveness possible. They were the daily foundation upon which all his other accomplishments were built. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD on the Germanic frontier, still fulfilling his duties as emperor even as illness weakened his body. His last words were reportedly, "Go to the rising sun, for I am already setting." But the wisdom he left behind has never set. It continues to guide and strengthen men across cultures and centuries. The emperor who could have been remembered for his military victories or administrative achievements is instead remembered for something far more valuable. His demonstration that philosophical wisdom and practical leadership can be united in a single life, that power and virtue can coexist, that strength and gentleness can complement each other. His private journal, never intended for publication, became one of the most influential books ever written because it revealed the inner workings of a man who successfully combined ancient wisdom with modern responsibility, philosophical idealism with practical effectiveness. Marcus proved that Stoic philosophy is not abstract theory, but practical training for meeting real-world challenges. Every principle he wrote about, he tested under the pressures of ruling an empire, facing military threats, dealing with political intrigue, and handling personal loss. The inner citadel he built in his own mind became a model for every man who wants to develop the strength that comes from self-mastery rather than external dominance. His example shows that true masculine power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself, your thoughts, your responses, your character development. Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break, he wrote. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest. This is the legacy he offers, not the elimination of life's storms, but the development of character that can remain steady regardless of what storms arise. Modern men face different challenges than Roman emperors, but the principles Marcus demonstrated remain universally relevant. The ability to maintain rational thought under pressure, the discipline to choose virtue over convenience, the wisdom to focus on what you can control rather than what you cannot, the strength to respond to poor treatment with good character. His legacy is not a set of rules to follow, but an example of what becomes possible when philosophical wisdom guides daily decisions. He showed that greatness is not about achievements that impress others, but about character that inspires others, not through what you accomplish, but through who you become while accomplishing it. The emperor who wrote his deepest thoughts in private, never imagining they would be read by millions, created a timeless blueprint for masculine strength through wisdom, leadership through character, and peace through philosophical discipline. Tonight, as you rest, remember that you carry within you the same potential for inner strength that guided Marcus Aurelius through the challenges of ruling an empire. The same philosophical principles that sustained him can sustain you. The same inner citadel that protected him can protect you. You may not be responsible for 50 million people, but you are responsible for one, yourself. And that responsibility, met with philosophical wisdom and daily discipline, is the foundation for every other form of strength and success. And so Marcus Aurelius teaches us that the only empire that truly matters is the empire of self-mastery, that the only victory worth pursuing is the victory over your own weaknesses, that the only strength that endures is the strength that comes from living according to virtue, regardless of external circumstances. Let this ancient wisdom of the philosopher emperor settle into your heart as you drift towards sleep. Let the principles of the inner citadel guard your dreams, reminding you that whatever challenges tomorrow may bring, you have within you the same potential for rational strength and virtuous character that sustained the greatest leader of the ancient world. Rest now in the peace that comes from philosophical wisdom, knowing that external circumstances cannot touch the citadel of a mind disciplined in virtue, that true strength comes from self-mastery, and that inner peace is always available to those who choose virtue over convenience. Sleep the sleep of philosopher emperors, and wake with the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius.